Greetings, history enthusiasts, and welcome back to Vibing History. Tonight, we embark on a monumental journey, a deep dive into the very fabric of ancient civilizations and the forgotten odysseys that shaped entire continents. We're talking about the Indo-Aryan migrations, a saga of movement, cultural exchange, and linguistic evolution that redefined the Indian subcontinent. Settle in, let the sounds of the past wash over you, and prepare to uncover truths hidden for millennia. Before we begin this epic tale, please take a moment to like, comment, and share this voyage with fellow seekers of knowledge. Your engagement truly fuels these explorations. Now let the story unfold. Sound of a crackling fire and distant, gentle wind. Welcome, wanderers of time, to another journey into the depths of history, here on Vibing History. Tonight, as the embers glow and shadows dance, we embark on a profound exploration, tracing the very echoes of ancient tongues across continents and millennia. We're delving into a story that has shaped languages, cultures, and even the very genetic tapestry of vast populations, the intricate tale of the Indo-Aryan migrations. Now, when we speak of Indo-Aryan migrations, we're talking about more than just people moving from one place to another. We're talking about an ethno-linguistic group, the Indo-Aryan peoples, who carried with them a family of languages that today dominate across Bangladesh, the Maldives, Nepal, a vast swathe of North India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. Imagine the sheer scale of that linguistic footprint, reaching across millions of lives, countless generations. These migrations, primarily from Central Asia, are believed to have begun as a slow, gradual diffusion after 2000 BCE during what historians call the Late Harappan period. It wasn't a sudden, thunderous invasion, but rather a persistent flow that, over centuries, led to a profound shift in the linguistic landscape of the northern Indian subcontinent. Hundreds of years later, these same movements saw the closely related Iranian languages brought to the Iranian plateau by the Iranians themselves. To understand where all this began, we need to zoom out far back to the Central Asian steppes, just north of the Caspian Sea. This vast, often unforgiving grassland was the crucible where the Proto-Indo-Iranian culture was forged. This ancestral culture, the shared root of both the Indo-Aryans and the Iranians, first emerged as the Sintashta culture around 2200 to 1900 BCE, spanning what is now modern-day Russia and Kazakhstan. It then blossomed further into the expansive Andronovo culture, which thrived from 2000 to 1450 BCE. It was from this Proto-Indo-Iranian stock that the Indo-Aryans began to splinter off. Sometime between 2000 and 1600 BCE, they started their southward journey, eventually interacting with and being influenced by the Bactria, Margiana culture, or BMAC, a non-Indo-European civilization from which they would borrow distinctive religious beliefs and practices. Although, interestingly, there's little evidence of significant genetic mixing at this stage. From the BMAC, the Indo-Aryans continued their remarkable journey, heading into northern Syria, and then, possibly in multiple waves, into the fertile plains of the Punjab, encompassing parts of modern-day northern Pakistan and India. Meanwhile, their Iranian kin could have reached western Iran even before 1300 BCE, both groups carrying their distinctive Indo-Iranian languages with them like precious cargo. The very idea of an Indo-European-speaking people migrating across such vast distances wasn't a sudden revelation. It was first put forward in the mid-17th century by a Dutch scholar named Marcus Sirius van Boxhorn. He observed the striking linguistic similarities between various European and Asian languages and proposed a single Scythian source, which then diffused through migrations from an original homeland. This groundbreaking language family and migration theory was then further developed in the 18th century by the Jesuit missionary Gaston Laurent Coudou, and later, quite famously, by William Jones, an employee of the East India Company, who in 1786, through his meticulous analysis of Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin, solidified the notion of a common linguistic ancestor. Now, this linguistic argument isn't just a theory floating in the ether. It's supported by a rich tapestry of evidence woven from archaeology, anthropology, genetics, literature, and even ecological studies. Literary research, for instance, reveals astonishing similarities between diverse, geographically separated Indo-Aryan historical cultures. Ecological studies paint a vivid picture of the second millennium BCE, showing widespread aridization that led to severe water shortages and dramatic environmental changes across both the Eurasian steppes and the Indian subcontinent. This climatic upheaval caused the collapse of many sedentary urban cultures in South Central Asia, Afghanistan, Iran, and India, effectively triggering large-scale migrations and ultimately leading to a fascinating merger of migrating peoples with the remaining post-urban cultures. And then, of course, there's the genetics. Comparisons of ancient DNA samples with modern South Asian populations reveal a significant infusion of male steppe ancestry during the second millennium BCE. This ancestry, strikingly, shows a disproportionately high contribution today in many Brahmin and Bhumihar groups, elite populations that have traditionally used Indo-European languages and preserved ancient texts. These Indo-Aryan migrations, initiated after the invention of the Revolutionary War chariot, roughly between 2000 and 1600 BCE, were a crucial part of a much larger story. The grand diffusion of Indo-European languages from their proto-homeland on the Pontic Caspian steppe. This vast grassland in Eastern Europe was the starting point for a process that began as early as the 5th to 4th millennia BCE, and these Eurasian steppe migrations truly began to pick up around 2000 BCE. These Indo-Aryan-speaking peoples were bound together not just by language, but by shared cultural norms, a concept they themselves referred to as Arya, meaning noble. The spread of this culture and language wasn't always through brute force. It often occurred through sophisticated patron-client systems, allowing for the absorption and acculturation of other groups. This dynamic explains the profound influence their culture had on those with whom they interacted. At its core, the Indo-Aryan migration theory is part of a much larger, more encompassing framework that seeks to explain the striking similarities we see across a vast array of contemporary and ancient languages. This framework is a beautiful confluence of linguistic, archaeological, and anthropological research, painting a comprehensive picture of the development and spread of Indo-European languages through both migration and acculturation. Let's delve deeper into these fundamental pillars. First, linguistics, tracing the relationships between languages. This is where the detective work truly begins. Linguists trace the intricate connections between the various Indo-European languages and painstakingly reconstruct the hypothetical Proto-Indo-European language, the grand ancestor from which they all sprang. This isn't a wild guess. It's possible because the processes that transform languages aren't random. They follow strict, predictable patterns. Sound shifts, the subtle changes in vowels and consonants, are particularly crucial, although grammar, especially morphology, and the lexicon or vocabulary, also play significant roles. Historical comparative linguistics allows us to see profound similarities between seemingly disparate languages, revealing their shared lineage. Interestingly, various characteristics of the Indo-European languages strongly argue against an Indian origin for these languages and instead point firmly to a steppe origin. Next, we turn to archaeology. The migrations from the steppe Urhimat. The archaeological record points to an Urhimat, or original homeland, on the Pontic Steppes. This region saw a dramatic shift after the introduction of cattle around 5200 BCE, transforming forager societies into pastoralist cultures. This change brought with it the development of hierarchical social systems, complete with chieftains, patron-client relationships, and the exchange of goods and gifts. The very oldest nucleus of this development may have been the Samara culture, nestled at a bend in the Volga in the late 6th and early 5th millennia BCE. Later, a broader horizon emerged, famously dubbed the Kurgan culture by Maria Gimbutas in the 1950s. This umbrella term included several cultures, such as the Samara culture and, most notably, the Yamnaya culture, also known as the pit grave culture. The Yamnaya, flourishing from the 36th to the 23rd centuries BCE, is often considered the true nucleus of the Proto-Indo-European language itself. From this vast region, which already encompassed various subcultures, Indo-European languages began to spread in all directions, west, south, and east, starting around 4000 BCE. These languages weren't necessarily carried by massive armies, but perhaps by smaller groups of males whose patron-client systems facilitated the inclusion of other groups into their evolving cultural system. Moving eastward from this core, we see the rise of the Sintashta culture from 2200 to 1900 BCE, where the common Indo-Iranian language was spoken. Out of Sintashta, the Andronovo culture then developed, thriving from 2000 to 1450 BCE. The Andronovo people engaged in crucial interactions with the Bactrian culture, the BMAC, which existed from 2250 to 1700 BCE. This interplay further shaped the Indo-Iranians, who, at some point between 2000 and 1600 BCE, diverged into two distinct branches, the Indo-Aryans and the Iranians. The Indo-Aryans then embarked on their journeys to the Levant and, crucially, to South Asia. Their migration into northern India, as we've noted, wasn't a massive, sudden influx, but rather a series of smaller groups, whose culture and language spread through those same mechanisms of acculturation and a strategic absorption of other groups into their influential patron-client networks. Third, we examine anthropology, elite recruitment, and language shift. This field helps us understand how relatively small groups can dramatically alter a larger cultural landscape. The concept of elite male dominance, where a minority group holds sway, is a powerful explanation for how a language shift could have occurred in northern India. As David Anthony, a leading scholar in this field, points out in his revised steppe hypothesis, the spread of Indo-European languages likely wasn't a simple chain-type folk migration. Instead, it involved the introduction of these languages by ritual and political elites, whose practices and speech were then emulated by much larger populations, a process he aptly calls elite recruitment. Consider the mechanisms at play. Local elites might have found it advantageous to join forces with these small but powerful groups of Indo-European speaking migrants. These newcomers possessed not only an attractive social system, but also superior weaponry and luxury goods that clearly signaled their status and power. For local leaders, aligning with these groups was a shrewd move, strengthening their own positions and providing additional advantages. These new members were further integrated through matrimonial alliances, weaving the newcomers into the fabric of the existing society. Joseph Salmons further emphasizes that language shift is often facilitated by the dislocation of language communities, particularly when the elite is taken over or when a local community becomes absorbed into a larger social structure. This wasn't just about force. It was about aspiration, adaptation, and strategic alliances. And finally, we turn to genetics, ancient ancestry, and multiple gene flows. Modern genetic studies have become an invaluable tool in unraveling these ancient movements. They've revealed that at the beginning of the second millennium BCE, the South Asian population was a complex mix of ancient ancestral South Indians, or ASI, and Iranian farmer ancestry. There was a clear genetic gradient, cline, running from the northwest to the south, directly correlating with the admixture of Iranian farmer ancestry. The Indus Periphery cline, representing the population of the thriving Indus Valley civilization, showed a majority of Iranian farmer heritage, a minority of ASI, but notably no detectable steppe ancestry. However, after the decline of the Indus Valley civilization in the second millennium BCE, a significant amount of male steppe ancestry abruptly appeared in the northwestern regions. This new influx helped create the identifiable ancient North Indian, or ANI, and ancient South Indian, or ASI, genetic lines. The ANI cline, crucially, was differentiated by this included steppe heritage. These two groups, ANI and ASI, then mixed extensively across India between 4,200 and 1,900 years ago, roughly 2,200 BCE to 100 CE. After this period of intense mixing, a shift towards endogamy, or marriage within specific groups, took place, possibly enforced by social values and norms during the later Gupta Empire. Intriguingly, studies consistently indicate that North and South Indians share a common maternal ancestry, while analyses of living South Asian populations reveal a disproportionate presence of ANI, or steppe ancestry, within the elite Brahmin castes, precisely those who historically used and preserved Indo-Aryan texts. This genetic evidence strongly supports the notion of an elite dominance during these migrations. Scientists like Morjani and his colleagues have proposed several scenarios for how these groups came together. There could have been migrations even before the development of agriculture, over 8,000 to 9,000 years ago. Then, there's the possibility of Western Asian peoples migrating with the spread of agriculture, perhaps up to 4,600 years ago. And finally, the critical period for our discussion tonight, migrations of Western Eurasians between 3,000 and 4,000 years ago, coinciding with a likely arrival of Indo-European languages. While David Reich notes that the onset of admixture aligns with the arrival of Indo-European languages, some researchers suggest that these initial unmixed groups were already present in India before the main Indo-Aryan migrations. Other studies, analyzing hereditary lactose intolerance, especially the -13910T lactase persistence mutation common in Europe and Central Asia, also map its spread across South Asia, further adding layers to this complex genetic narrative. The history of the domestic horse in South Asia, its dating and genetic lineage, is another fascinating avenue of research, providing additional clues to the movements of peoples and technologies across ancient landscapes. Sound of the crackling fire intensifies slightly, then softens back to a steady rhythm, accompanied by the gentle rustle of leaves. Now, let us delve into the whispers of ancient texts themselves, the literary research that gives voice to these historical movements. The earliest known inscribed Indo-Iranian words, including invocations of Indo-Aryan deities, appear not in India, but around the mid-2nd millennium BCE, as loanwords embedded within Hurrian treaties of the Mitanni kingdom, in present-day northern Syria. This is a crucial geographical clue. Beyond the linguistic borrowings, the religious practices depicted in the Rig Veda, the foundational text of Vedic Hinduism, bear remarkable resemblances to those found in the Avesta, the central religious text of Zoroastrianism, the ancient Iranian faith. Both traditions feature deities like Mitra, priests known as Hat in the Rig Veda and Zayatar in the Avesta, and the ritual use of a sacred substance, Soma in the Rig Veda and Hauma in the Avesta. Yet there's a fascinating inversion. The Indo-Aryan Deva, meaning God, is cognate with the Iranian Deva, meaning demon. Similarly, the Indo-Aryan Asura, initially a name for a group of gods but later a demon, is cognate with the Iranian Ahura, meaning Lord God. This linguistic divergence is often interpreted as a reflection of ancient religious rivalry between the Indo-Aryans and the Iranians, hinting at a shared origin that later saw their theological paths diverge. Linguists like Burrow argue that the profound similarity between the Avestan of the Gathas, the oldest part of the Avesta, and the Vedic Sanskrit of the Rig Veda pushes the dating of the prophet Zarathustra, or at least the Gathas, closer to the conventional Rig Veda dating of 1500 to 1200 BCE, perhaps even as early as 1100 BCE, or even earlier. This temporal proximity between these foundational texts is a powerful indicator of their shared, recent past. The Avesta itself makes mention of Aryan Vaja, one of the 16 lands of the Aryans. Scholars like Noli, by interpreting geographical references within the Avesta, place the Aryan Vaja within the Hindu Kush Mountains, while others point to northeastern Iran or even the region south of the Aral Sea as the probable homeland of Avestan speakers. When we turn to the geography described in the Rig Veda, it appears to be primarily centered on the land of the seven rivers. While the precise location of some of these Rigvedic rivers remains a subject of debate in the earlier books, the Natastudi Sukta provides a vital geographical snapshot of late Rigvedic society. The Sarasvati River, a central figure in the Rig Veda, is mentioned between the Yamuna to the east and the Sutlej to the west. Later texts, like the Brahmanas and Mahabharata, vividly describe the Sarasvati drying up into a desert. Scholars generally agree that at least some of the Rigvedic references to the Sarasvati point to the Gagar-Hakra river system. However, the Afghan river Haraxvati/Harvati, now known as the Helmand, is also sometimes proposed as the locus of the early Rigvedic river, suggesting a potential transfer of the name. If the early Rigvedic Sarasvati were definitively identified with the Gagar-Hakra before its assumed drying up in the early 2nd millennium, it would place the Rigveda well before the commonly accepted dates of the Indo-Aryan migration, creating a fascinating challenge to current theories. Crucially, a non-Indo-Aryan linguistic substratum in the river and place names of the Rigvedic homeland would lend strong support to an external origin for the Indo-Aryans. And indeed, while most place names and the vast majority of river names in the northwest of the Indian subcontinent are Indo-Aryan, non-Indo-Aryan names are notably frequent in the Gagar and Kabul river areas, the former being a post-Harappan stronghold of indigenous Indus populations. This linguistic layering offers compelling evidence for interaction and adoption. While the Avesta, like the Rigveda, doesn't explicitly state an external homeland or migration, later Hindu texts like the Brahmanas, Mahabharata, Ramayana, and Puranas tell a different story. These later texts are centered in the Ganges region, rather than Haryana and Punjab, and mention regions even further to the south and east. This strongly suggests a later movement or expansion of the Vedic religion and culture eastward, away from its initial northwestern foothold. The Shrauta Sutra of Bodhana, for instance, specifically refers to the Parasis and Aratas who remained behind, and others who moved eastwards to the middle Ganges Valley, to places like Kasi, Videhas, and the Kuru Pankalas. When one carefully examines these texts, the evidence for migration, though sometimes veiled, is undeniably present. Later Vedic texts clearly show this geographical shift. The Yajurveda places the ritualist and philosopher Yajnavalkya in the eastern region of Mithila. The Aitareya Brahmana records the migration of Vishvamitra's sons to the north, and the Shatapatha Brahmana describes the Asuras being driven to the north. Much later texts even speak of Manu as a king from Dravida, who, in the flood legend, strands his ship in northwestern India or the Himalayas. The Puranas record the story of Yayati, who left Priyag, the confluence of the Ganges and Yamuna, and conquered the region of Sapta Sindhu. His 5 sons, Yadu, Dryas, Puru, Anu, and Turvashu, correspond to the main tribes mentioned in the Rigveda. These same Puranas recount that the Dryas were driven out of the land of the 7 rivers, and that their king Gandhara settled in a northwestern region that would become known as Gandhara, further illustrating these ancient patterns of movement and settlement. The ambient sound deepens, perhaps a subtle shift to a more ancient, expansive wind sound, hinting at vast landscapes. Now, let's consider a powerful external catalyst for many of these sweeping movements. Ecology, climate change, and widespread drought may have been the primary triggers, not just for the initial dispersal of Indo-European speakers, but also for the subsequent migrations from the Eurasian steppes into South-Central Asia and India. Picture this. Around 4200 to 4100 BCE, a significant climate shift occurred, manifesting as colder winters across Europe. In the lower Danube Valley, between 4200 and 3900 BCE, many ancient Tel settlements were burned and abandoned. Meanwhile, the Kukitini Tripoli culture, further east, responded by increasing fortifications and shifting eastward towards the Dnieper River. This period saw steppe herders, who were archaic Proto-Indo-European speakers, spreading into the lower Danube Valley, either directly causing or cleverly capitalizing on the collapse of what is sometimes referred to as Old Europe. The Yamnaya Horizon, a crucial phase in our narrative, was itself an adaptation to a dramatic climate change that swept through the steppes between 3500 to 3000 BCE, making them significantly drier and cooler. To sustain their herds, these pastoralists had to move frequently. The invention and adoption of wagons and horseback riding became indispensable, facilitating a new, more mobile form of pastoralism. This wasn't just a technological shift. It was accompanied by the development of new social rules and institutions designed to regulate these extensive movements across the steppes. It forged a distinct cultural identity, creating a clear awareness of cultural others who did not share in these new practices and ways of life. Then, in the 3rd millennium BCE, a period of widespread aridification intensified, leading to severe water shortages and profound ecological changes in both the Eurasian steppes and the Indian subcontinent. On the steppes, this increasing dryness led to changes in vegetation, effectively triggering higher mobility and transition to nomadic cattle breeding. Herders had to move more, range further, to find adequate grazing for their animals. The impact in South Asia was equally, if not more, devastating. This widespread water shortage had a strong and direct impact. It caused the collapse of sedentary urban cultures in South Central Asia, Afghanistan, Iran, and India, and triggering large-scale migrations. This environmental upheaval inevitably led to the new arrivals ING, to merge with and dominate the post-urban cultures. The magnificent Indus Valley civilization, for instance, experienced a period of localization, meaning its grand urban centers began to disappear, replaced by smaller, more regional cultures. This decline, which began around 1900 BCE, predates the main Indo-Aryan migrations and is now largely attributed to aridification caused by shifting monsoon patterns. A regional cultural discontinuity is evident during the 2nd millennium BCE, with many Indus Valley cities abandoned, while new settlements began to flourish in Gujarat and East Punjab. This major geographic population shift is the only archaeologically documented west-to-east movement of human populations in the Indian subcontinent before the 1st millennium BCE, strongly suggesting an internally driven migration in response to ecological pressures. While the Aryan invasion theory, a now largely discarded concept that posited a brutal conquest of the IVC by barbaric Aryans, has been thoroughly refuted by archaeological and genetic evidence, it's crucial to understand the nuances of the Indo-Aryan migration theory. The decline of the Indus Valley civilization was primarily due to environmental factors, setting the stage for the arrival and integration of new populations. As scholars like Erdosy have noted, there's no evidence of invasions by a barbaric race enjoying technological and military superiority, but rather some support was found in the archaeological record for small-scale migrations from Central Asia to the Indian subcontinent in the late 3rd/early 2nd millennia BCE. The historical Vedic culture, therefore, is increasingly seen as the fascinating result of an amalgamation, the coming together of immigrating Indo-Aryans with the remnants of the indigenous civilizations, such as the ochre-colored pottery culture. This brings us to a crucial point about the evolution of these theories themselves. In the 16th century, European visitors to India began to notice striking similarities between Indian and European languages. By 1653, Van Boxhorn had already published his hypothesis of a proto-language, which he called Scythian, connecting Germanic, Romance, Greek, Baltic, Slavic, Celtic, and Iranian languages. Though he incorrectly included Turkish, his insight was profound. Gaston Laurent Courdeau, a French Jesuit who lived in India, further solidified these observations in 1767, clearly demonstrating the analogy between Sanskrit and European languages. However, it was William Jones, a judge, linguist, and classic scholar in Calcutta, who in 1786 famously postulated a proto-language that united Sanskrit, Persian, Greek, Latin, Gothic, and Celtic. While his work, like that of his predecessors, contained some inaccuracies, erroneously including Egyptian, Japanese, and Chinese, while omitting Hindustani and Slavic, his core observation was groundbreaking. He declared, "The Sanskrit language, whatever be its antiquity, is of a wonderful structure, more perfect than the Greek, more copious than the Latin, and more exquisitely refined than either, yet bearing to both of them a stronger affinity, both in the roots of verbs and in the forms of grammar, than could possibly have been produced by accident, so strong indeed, that no philologer could examine them all three, without believing them to have sprung from some common source. which perhaps no longer exists. Jones concluded that all these languages, including the Old Persian, originated from the same ancient source. For a time in 19th century Indo-European studies, the language of the Rig Veda was considered the most archaic Indo-European language known, with the only records that could credibly be dated to the Bronze Age. This perceived primacy of Sanskrit led some scholars, like Friedrich Schlegel, to hypothesize that the Proto-Indo-European homeland itself was in India, with other dialects spreading westward through historical migration. However, with the 20th century discovery of Bronze Age attestations of Indo-European languages, such as Anatolian and Mycenaean Greek, Vedic Sanskrit lost its unique status as the oldest known Indo-European language, opening the door for broader perspectives on the Urimat. Now, a delicate but necessary point in this historical narrative, the term Aryan. In the 1850s, Max Muller introduced the notion of two Aryan races, a Western and an Eastern one, who he believed migrated from the Caucasus into Europe and India, respectively. Muller, unfortunately, dichotomized these groups, often assigning greater prominence and value to the Western branch, and suggesting the Eastern branch of the Aryan race was more powerful than the indigenous Eastern natives, who were easy to conquer. Herbert Hope Risley further expanded on Muller's two-race Indo-European speaking Aryan invasion theory, concluding that the caste system was a remnant of the Indo-Aryans' domination of the native Dravidians, and even drawing connections between phenotypes and caste. It's vital to clarify that Muller, though his language was later co-opted, was deeply saddened by the racist expressions that his classifications eventually took on. He passionately argued against racism, famously stating that an ethnologist who speaks of Aryan race, Aryan blood, Aryan eyes and hair, is as great a sinner as a linguist who speaks of a dolichocephalic dictionary or a brachycephalic grammar. He emphatically insisted that the blackest Hindus represent an earlier stage of Aryan speech and thought than the fairer Scandinavians. In his later work, Max Muller meticulously limited the use of the term Aryan to a strictly linguistic definition, stripping it of any racial connotations. The Aryan invasion hypothesis, however, lingered. The excavations of Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and Latau in the 1920s revealed that northern India already possessed an advanced urban culture when the Indo-Aryans migrated into the area. This discovery reshaped the theory from an invasion by advanced Aryans over a primitive aboriginal population to a migration of nomadic peoples into an advanced urban civilization, a comparison often made to the Germanic migrations during the fall of the Western Roman Empire or the Kassite invasion of Babylonia. For a brief period, this was indeed framed as a hostile invasion. The decline of the Indus Valley civilization, coinciding with a likely period of Indo-Aryan migrations, seemed to offer independent support for such an invasion. Mid-20th century archaeologist Mortimer Wheeler, interpreting unburied corpses found at Mohenjo-Daro as victims of conquest, famously declared that the god Indra stands accused of the civilization's destruction. However, this invasion position was thoroughly discarded as no evidence of warfare was ever found. The skeletons were determined to be hasty interments, not massacred victims. Wheeler himself later nuanced his interpretation, acknowledging that it was a possibility, but it can't be proven, and it may not be correct, and attributing the decay of Mohenjo-Daro to structural causes like salinization, rather than invasion. Nevertheless, even though the concept of an invasion has been discredited in mainstream scholarship, opponents of the Indo-Aryan migration theory continue to misrepresent it as an Aryan invasion theory, portraying it as a racist and colonialist discourse designed to justify British rule by asserting that a white race subdued a darker local population. By the late 20th century, as new data accumulated, ideas were significantly refined. The current understanding emphasizes migration and acculturation as the primary mechanisms by which Indo-Aryans, their language, and their culture spread into northwest India around 1500 BCE. The term invasion is now only typically used by those who oppose the Indo-Aryan migration theory. As Michael Witzel states, the older theory has been supplanted by much more sophisticated models over the past few decades, philologists first and archaeologists somewhat later, notice certain inconsistencies in the older theory and try to find new explanations, a new version of the immigration theories. This evolution in approach was consistent with a broader shift in understanding language transfer in general. Consider the migration of the Greeks into Greece between 2100 and 1600 BCE and their adoption of Linear B script, or the Indo-Europeanization of Western Europe in stages between 2200 and 1300 BCE. As our knowledge of Indo-European migrations and their purported homeland becomes increasingly sophisticated, new questions inevitably arise. Mallory notes that it is evident that we still have a very long way to go. One such intriguing question revolves around the origin of shared agricultural vocabulary across Indo-European languages. The earliest dates for agriculturalism in areas settled by Indo-Europeans often seem too late to account for this shared vocabulary, prompting us to ask, what is their true origin? The journey continues, always revealing new layers beneath the surface of the past. Sound of a distant, echoing bird call, fading into the gentle hum of wind through trees. Welcome back, curious minds, to another journey into the echoes of the past. Gather close, find your comfortable space, and let the sounds of distant winds and crackling hearths set the scene. Tonight, we continue our deep dive into the story of humanity's ancient wanderings, specifically focusing on a pivotal chapter that shaped vast swathes of our world, the epic journey of the early Indo-Iranians. Last time, we delved into the profound mystery of the Proto-Indo-European homeland, a place shrouded in the mists of time, yet meticulously reconstructed through the quiet whispers of ancient tongues. We explored how linguists, like diligent detectives, piece together fragments of forgotten words and grammatical structures to hypothesize a common ancestor language, spoken perhaps on the Pontic Caspian steppes. Think of it like uncovering the foundational bedrock from which countless rivers of language would later flow. Tonight, we follow one of the mightiest of those rivers as it bifurcates and carves out new destinies. We're tracing the extraordinary trek of the Indo-Aryan and Iranian peoples, ethno-linguistic groups whose descendants now speak the predominant languages of places like Bangladesh, Maldives, Nepal, North India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, as well as the Iranian plateau. This wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic event, but rather a slow, persistent diffusion, a grand historical unfolding that began after 2000 BCE. Imagine tiny streams branching off from a mighty river, gradually carving new paths through the landscape, subtly shifting the very geography of human culture and language. Our story truly begins on the Central Asian steppes, north of the Caspian Sea. Here, around 2200 to 1900 BCE, a culture known as the Sintashta emerged, a crucible where the Proto-Indo-Iranian culture took shape. Picture a rugged land, vast and open, where hardy people developed innovative technologies and forged the beginnings of a shared identity. This Sintashta culture, flourishing in what is now Russia and Kazakhstan, wasn't just a static settlement. It was a dynamic, evolving entity that morphed into the even more widespread Andronovo culture, which thrived from 2000 to 1450 BCE. It was within this larger Andronovo sphere, a tapestry of similar local Bronze Age cultures stretching across western Siberia and the Central Eurasian steppe, that the Proto-Indo-Iranians further developed. Think of it as a vast cultural laboratory, where ideas, technologies, and beliefs were exchanged and refined. Now, imagine a moment of divergence, a subtle but profound splitting of paths. Sometime between 2000 and 1600 BCE, the Indo-Aryans began to separate from their Iranian cousins. Like two mighty branches growing from a single trunk, they started their own distinct southward migration. A destination? The Bactria, Margiana culture, or BMAC, a fascinating and influential non-Indo-European civilization centered in what is now northwestern Afghanistan and southern Turkmenistan. This wasn't a hostile takeover, but a period of profound cultural exchange. The Indo-Aryans, while retaining their language, borrowed significantly from the BMAC. Their distinctive religious beliefs and practices, in fact, show clear influences from this ancient culture. Think of it as a cultural alchemy, where new elements were absorbed and integrated, enriching their own traditions. We're talking about fascinating borrowings like certain religious rites, and even the very name of a prominent deity, Indra, and the ritual drink, Soma, finding their way into the Indo-Aryan pantheon and practices. There's little evidence of large-scale genetic mingling, but the cultural imprint was undeniable. From the BMAC, the Indo-Aryans continued their remarkable journey. They moved into northern Syria, where we find tantalizing linguistic evidence in the form of loanwords within Hurrian treaties of the Mitanni kingdom, dating to the mid-2nd millennium BCE. Imagine finding snippets of an ancient tongue embedded in the diplomatic documents of a forgotten empire. These fragments include invocations of Indo-Aryan deities like Mitra, Varuna, and Indra, and even technical terms related to horse riding and chariot driving, a clear indicator of their expertise and influence. And then, in possibly multiple waves, the Indo-Aryans embarked on the most significant leg of their journey, migrating into the Punjab, in what is now northern Pakistan and India. Meanwhile, their Iranian counterparts, closely related yet distinct, made their way into the Iranian plateau, possibly reaching western Iran even before 1300 BCE. Both carried with them the seeds of the Indo-Iranian languages, which would blossom into the vibrant linguistic landscapes we know today. Now, you might be wondering, how do we know all this? These migrations happened millennia ago, leaving no Instagram stories or Twitter threads. This understanding isn't the work of a single flash of insight, but the culmination of centuries of meticulous research across multiple disciplines. The very idea of an Indo-European speaking people migrating across continents was first hypothesized in the mid-17th century by the Dutch scholar Marcus Sirius van Boxhorn. He observed striking linguistic similarities, the echoes of a shared past, among diverse European languages and even some in Western and South Asia. He proposed a single origin, a Scythian language, diffused by ancient migrations. This linguistic detective work was further developed in the 18th century by figures like the Jesuit missionary Gaston Laurent Courteau, and later, famously, by Sir William Jones, an East India Company employee and a brilliant linguist. In 1786, Jones, captivated by the elegance of Sanskrit, declared in his third anniversary discourse to the Asiatic Society that Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin bore such strong affinities that they must have sprung from some common, now-lost source. This foundational linguistic argument has since been bolstered by a rich tapestry of evidence. Archaeology unearthing the settlements and artifacts of these ancient travelers, anthropology shedding light on how cultures interact and shift, genetics tracing the invisible threads of ancestry across millennia, and literary research revealing subtle references and shared cultural motifs in ancient texts. Even ecological studies play a role, revealing how widespread aridification and climate change in the 2nd millennium BCE, affecting both the Eurasian steppes and the Indian subcontinent, caused the collapse of sedentary urban cultures and triggered these very migrations. Imagine the profound impact of prolonged droughts, forcing entire populations to seek new lands and new ways of life. The Indo-Aryan migrations, we believe, started around 2000 to 1600 BCE, a period revolutionized by the invention of the war chariot, a powerful tool for warfare and transportation that undoubtedly facilitated these vast movements. This was part of a much larger diffusion of Indo-European languages from their original homeland on the Pontic, Caspian steppe, a process that began even earlier in the 5th to 4th millennia BCE. These migrating peoples, united by shared cultural norms and a common language, referred to themselves as Arya, meaning noble. Their culture and language spread not just through conquest, but through intricate patron-client systems, allowing for the absorption and acculturation of diverse groups, explaining their profound influence on the cultures they encountered. This grand narrative of Indo-Aryan migration is, in essence, a cornerstone of a much larger theoretical framework that seeks to explain the astonishing similarities among a wide range of ancient and contemporary languages. It's a testament to the power of interdisciplinary research, weaving together threads from linguistics, archaeology, and anthropology to paint a comprehensive picture. From a purely linguistic perspective, the connections are undeniable. Historical comparative linguistics allows us to reconstruct Proto-Indo-European, the ancestral tongue, by meticulously comparing the systematic sound shifts and grammatical patterns across its many descendant languages. Think of it like a linguistic family tree, tracing lines of descent and divergence. Crucially, various characteristics of the Indo-European languages argue against an Indian origin and point strongly to a steppe homeland. The principle of linguistic center of gravity suggests that the most diverse area of a language family is its most likely point of origin. Northern India, with only a single branch, Indo-Aryan, simply doesn't fit this criterion compared to the rich linguistic tapestry of Central Eastern Europe. Archaeology, our silent witness, provides a tangible anchor for these linguistic theories. It posits the Pontic Steppes as the Urhimat, the original homeland. This region saw the crucial shift from foraging to pastoralism around 5200 BCE, spurred by the introduction of cattle. This led to more complex, hierarchical social systems, with chieftains and patron-client relationships. The Samara culture, and later the Yamna culture, or pit grave culture, are considered the nuclei of Proto-Indo-European speech. From here, beginning around 4000 BCE, these languages fanned out across Europe and Asia, likely carried by small, mobile groups who integrated other communities into their cultural and linguistic sphere. The eastward expansion saw the emergence of the Sintashta culture, where, as we discussed, the common Indo-Iranian language was likely spoken. This culture, remarkably, is where the earliest known chariots have been found, revolutionizing warfare and transportation. From Sintashta, the Andronovo culture blossomed, interacting with the Bactria-Margiana culture, further shaping the Indo-Iranians until they're split into Indo-Aryans and Iranians. The subsequent migrations were not necessarily large-scale movements of entire populations, but rather a gradual diffusion, a series of smaller groups spreading their culture and language through processes of acculturation and the absorption of other communities. Anthropology further refines our understanding, highlighting the concept of elite recruitment and language shift. Imagine a scenario where relatively small but well-organized groups, perhaps possessing superior weaponry or an attractive social system, take on a dominant role. Local elites, seeing the advantages, might align themselves with these newcomers, leading to the adoption of their language and customs. This isn't just about force. It's about social prestige, political savvy, and advantageous alliances. The genetic studies we'll discuss next time, showing a disproportionate presence of steppe ancestry within certain elite Brahmin castes in modern South Asia, lend powerful support to this elite dominance hypothesis. It's a complex and layered story, unfolding over millennia, shaped by climate, technology, social dynamics, and the enduring power of language. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of this epic journey, but hopefully, you're starting to feel the winds of change that swept across the ancient world, carrying the seeds of new civilizations and new ways of speaking. Next, we'll delve even deeper into the genetic evidence that has revolutionized our understanding of these migrations, unraveling the human tapestry strand by intricate strand. Stay with me as we continue to journey through the fascinating past. Sounds of wind whistling softly over a vast, dry plain, almost like a sigh from ancient times, mixed with the distant, rhythmic chimes of very old bells. Welcome back, fellow travelers of the past, to another deep dive into the echoes of forgotten eras. I'm vibing history, and tonight, as the world outside winds down, we're venturing into a profound chapter in the story of humanity, a story written not just in stones or scrolls, but in the very languages we speak, the very genes we carry, and the shifting sands of a changing climate. Our journey has already traced the elusive whispers of the Proto-Indo-European homeland, those ancient roots reaching back to the Pontic Caspian steppes. We've ridden with the early Indo-Iranians, those audacious horsemen, as they embarked on their epic journey across the vast Central Asian steppes. Now we arrive at a pivotal moment, a confluence of environmental upheaval, cultural transformation, and the arrival of a new linguistic and social force in one of the most ancient and complex cradles of civilization, ancient India. Tonight, we peel back the layers of time to understand the Indo-Aryan migrations. This isn't a tale of simple conquest, but a nuanced tapestry woven from linguistic shifts, climatic pressures, archaeological findings, and the silent, undeniable story held within our very DNA. It's a journey into how the predominant languages of places like modern-day Bangladesh, Nepal, North India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka came to be. It's about a profound language shift that began to unfold after 2000 BCE, a slow, steady diffusion from the heart of Central Asia into the northern Indian subcontinent, centuries before the Iranian languages took root on the Iranian plateau, brought by peoples who were, in essence, close kin to these Indo-Aryans. Sound of a distant, slow-moving river with occasional, subtle bird calls. To truly grasp this, we must first recall the crucible where the Indo-Aryans and Iranians were forged. Imagine the Central Asian steppes, north of the Caspian Sea. Here, around 2200 to 1900 BCE, the Sintashta culture emerged, a vibrant, innovative society in what is now Russia and Kazakhstan. It's here that the war chariot, a revolutionary piece of ancient technology, first galloped into existence, fundamentally changing warfare and travel. This Sintashta culture then evolved into the broader Andronovo culture, flourishing from 2000 to 1450 BCE, spreading its influence across a vast sweep of western Siberia and the Central Eurasian steppe. Sometime between 2000 and 1600 BCE, these Indo-Aryans, a distinct branch of the Indo-Iranians, began their southward trajectory. Their path led them to the Bactria-Marjana culture, or BMAC, a non-Indo-European civilization centered in what is now northwestern Afghanistan and southern Turkmenistan. This wasn't a military conquest of the BMAC, but a powerful cultural exchange. From the BMAC, these migrating Indo-Aryans absorbed distinctive religious beliefs and practices, enriching their own traditions, even as genetic evidence suggests relatively little intermingling of the populations themselves. Think of it as a deep spiritual borrowing, a profound intellectual exchange, rather than a mixing of bloodlines. From the BMAC, the Indo-Aryans continued their journey. Some groups migrated into northern Syria, leaving their mark in the Mitanni kingdom, which we'll touch on later. But many, in what appears to be multiple waves, moved into the fertile lands of the Punjab, a region straddling modern-day northern Pakistan and India. They carried with them their unique Indo-Iranian languages, sowing the linguistic seeds of a vast new cultural landscape. Sound of a crackling fire, gentle and steady, with a subtle undertone of a deep, resonant hum. Now, this idea of Indo-European speaking people migrating, of languages spreading, isn't a modern invention. It was first hypothesized way back in the mid-17th century by the Dutch scholar Marcus Aurelius van Boxhorn. He sought to explain the uncanny linguistic similarities across seemingly disparate languages, proposing a single ancestral source and subsequent migrations. This linguistic detective work was refined in the 18th century by figures like the Jesuit missionary Gaston Laurent Cordoue and the East India Company employee William Jones. Jones, in 1786, famously noted the striking affinities between Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin, suggesting they sprung from some common source, which perhaps no longer exists. This was a profound realization, a crack in the wall of isolated histories, revealing a shared, deeper past. What's truly fascinating is how this linguistic argument, conceived centuries ago, finds robust support today from a mosaic of evidence. We're talking archaeology, anthropology, genetics, literary analysis, and even ecological studies. For instance, literary research reveals striking similarities between geographically distinct Indo-Aryan historical cultures, echoes across vast distances. Ecological studies paint a dramatic picture. In the second millennium BCE, widespread aridification, essentially a massive drought, gripped both the Eurasian steppes and the Indian subcontinent. This led to severe water shortages and fundamental ecological shifts. In Central Asia, it forced sedentary urban cultures to collapse, triggering large-scale migrations as people sought more habitable lands. In India, it contributed to the decline of the mighty Indus Valley civilization. These migrating peoples, often pastoralists, merged with the post-urban cultures they encountered, leading to profound transformations. And then there's genetics, the story etched in our DNA. Comparisons of ancient DNA samples with modern South Asian populations reveal a significant infusion of male steppe ancestry during the second millennium BCE. This ancestry is disproportionately high today in groups like Mini Brahmin and Bhumihar castes, elite populations that traditionally used Indo-European languages and preserved ancient texts. This isn't just theory, it's written in the code of life itself. These Indo-Aryan migrations, spurred on by the war chariot's invention and the changing climate, truly kick-started between approximately 2000 and 1600 BCE. They were part of a much grander diffusion of Indo-European languages from their proto-homeland on the Pontic Steppe, a movement that had begun millennia earlier. These Indo-Aryan speakers, united by shared cultural norms and a common language, refer to themselves as Arya, meaning noble. Their culture and language spread not necessarily through overwhelming numbers, but through a powerful system of patron-client relationships. This allowed for the absorption and acculturation of other groups, integrating them into this expanding cultural sphere, explaining the profound and lasting influence on the cultures they encountered. Sound of distant, echoing chants or humming, very subtle and atmospheric like ancient voices across time. To understand the sheer power of this framework, we need to delve into its fundamentals. The Indo-Aryan migration theory is part of a larger tapestry of understanding, a theoretical framework that explains the remarkable similarities between a vast array of contemporary and ancient languages. It's a multidisciplinary effort, weaving together linguistics, archaeology, and anthropology to give us a comprehensive overview of how Indo-European languages developed and how they spread, not just by migration, but through a process of acculturation, where cultures adapt and absorb new influences. Let's start with linguistics, the relationships between languages. This is where the detective work truly shines. By comparing various Indo-European languages, scholars can trace their connections and even reconstruct the Proto-Indo-European language, the ancestral tongue. How is this possible? Because languages don't change randomly. They follow discernible patterns. Sound shifts, the way vowels and consonants transform over time, are particularly crucial, but grammar and vocabulary also offer vital clues. Through historical comparative linguistics, we can identify profound similarities between languages that, on the surface, might seem entirely different. And importantly, various characteristics of the Indo-European languages themselves argue against an Indian origin, instead pointing towards that steppe origin we discussed earlier. The comparative method, developed primarily in the 19th century by scholars like Rasmus Rask, Karl Werner, and Jacob Grimm, is the bedrock of this linguistic reconstruction. It's about comparing cognate terms, words that share a common origin, across different languages. By identifying regular sound correspondences, linguists can postulate sequences of sound changes and then reconstruct the proto-language. This method allows us to peel back layers of linguistic evolution, revealing the deep structural connections that bind these languages together. Proto-Indo-European, or PIE, is that reconstructed common ancestor. Imagine trying to piece together a jigsaw puzzle where most of the pieces are missing, but you have enough fragments to discern the original image. Scholars have poured more effort into reconstructing PI than almost any other proto-language, making it arguably the best understood proto-language of its age. Estimates for when it was spoken as a single language or a group of related dialects vary from the 7th to the 2nd millennium BCE. The most widely accepted hypothesis, the Kurgan hypothesis, places its origin in the Pontic Caspian steppe in the 5th or 4th millennia BCE. By studying the shared vocabulary of the early Indo-European languages, we can even reconstruct aspects of the culture of its speakers, the Proto-Indo-Europeans. This includes a complex system of morphology, with intricate declensions for nouns and conjugations for verbs, and the fascinating phenomenon of ablaut, those internal vowel changes we see in English words like sing, sang, sung. Sound of gentle, rhythmic breathing, like someone falling into a focused state, mixed with the faint hum of a distant village. Now, let's consider some strong linguistic arguments against an Indian origin for Proto-Indo-European. One key principle is the linguistic center of gravity. The most likely point of origin for a language family is typically where its diversity is greatest. By this criterion, northern India, home to only a single branch of the Indo-European family, the Indo-Aryan branch, is highly unlikely to be the homeland. Compare that to Central Eastern Europe, which hosts the Italic, Venetic, Illyrian, Albanian, Germanic, Baltic, Slavic, Thracian, and Greek branches. The sheer breadth of linguistic differentiation points elsewhere. Furthermore, linguists have recognized that language change isn't always a neat, tree-like progression. Sometimes certain aerial features cut across language groups, like ripples spreading across a pond. This wave model of linguistic change, identified by scholars like Schmidt and Schuckardt, is evident in Indo-European languages. The strong correspondence between the dialectal relationships and their geographical arrangement in their earliest attested forms makes an Indian origin less plausible. Perhaps even more compelling is the evidence of substratum influence. Already in the 1870s, linguists realized that the vocalism of Greek and Latin couldn't be explained solely by Sanskrit, suggesting that the former were more original. We also see clear evidence of mutual influence between Indo-Iranian and Uralic languages. For example, the Finnish word visara, meaning hammer, is related to Vajra, the formidable weapon of the Vedic god Indra. Given the Finno-Ugric homeland in northern Europe, these contacts point directly to an interaction zone between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, aligning with the steppe homeland hypothesis. And then there's the distinct influence of Dravidian and other South Asian languages on Indo-Aryan. These languages share syntactical and morphological features, like the use of retroflex consonants, gerunds, and quotative markers. They're conspicuously absent in other Indo-European languages, even Old Iranian, its closest relative. This is taken as strong evidence of substratum influence, meaning that native Dravidian speakers learned and adopted Indic languages, carrying over elements of their mother tongue. This process of shift plausibly explains how the majority of early Old Indo-Aryan speakers may have had a Dravidian mother tongue, which they gradually abandoned for Indo-Aryan. A pre-Indo-European linguistic substratum in India further strengthens the case against India as the original homeland. Sound of a gentle rustling of leaves with a subtle, underlying hum, like ancient secrets being stirred. Now, let's turn to archaeology, the tangible echoes of these migrations. The Sintashta, Andronovo, Bactrium Argiana, and Yaz cultures have all been associated with the Indo-Iranian migrations in Central Asia. Within South Asia, cultures like the Gandhara grave, Cemetery H, Copper Horde, and Painted Gray were strong candidates for the subsequent cultures linked to the Indo-Aryan movements. It's crucial to understand that the decline of the Indus Valley civilization predates the main Indo-Aryan migrations. However, archaeological data suggests a fascinating cultural continuity in the archaeological record, and the presence of Dravidian loanwords in the Rigveda clearly points to a significant interaction between post-Harappan and Indo-Aryan cultures. This wasn't a clean break, but a complex, intertwined evolution. The story unfolds in stages. Around 6,000 years ago, the Proto-Indo-Europeans began to spread from their homeland in Central Eurasia. Then, about 4,000 years ago, Indo-European-speaking peoples started to migrate out of the Eurasian steppes, initiating a grand dispersal. Scholars generally regard the Middle Volga region, home to the Samara culture and later the Yamna culture, as the Urhimat, or homeland of the Indo-Europeans, as posited by the Kurgan hypothesis. From this heartland, Indo-European languages diffused across the vast Eurasian steppes between roughly 4,500 and 2,500 BCE, forming the Yamna culture. David Anthony provides an elaborate overview of the migration sequence, noting that the oldest attested Indo-European language, Hittite, belonging to the Anatolian branch, seems to predate Proto-Indo-European itself. A significant shift occurred around 4,200 to 4,000 BCE, with archaic Proto-Indo-European speaking steppe herders expanding into the lower Danube Valley. Later, between 3,100 and 2,000 BCE, a more substantial folk migration of Proto-Indo-European speakers from the Yamna culture moved west into the Danube Valley, likely leading to the splitting off of pre-Italic, pre-Celtic, and pre-Germanic languages. This was followed by a northward movement, which separated Baltic Slavic languages around 2,800 BCE. The critical phase for our story is the emergence of the Indo-Iranian language and culture in the Sintashta culture around 2050 to 1900 BCE, the very place where the war chariot was invented. Genetic studies have even found a close autosomal genetic relationship between the peoples of the corded ware culture in Central Europe and the Sintashta culture, suggesting a common genetic source and an eastward migration of corded ware peoples. The Indo-Iranian culture further developed within the broader Andronovo culture, circa 2000 to 1450 BCE, which, as we discussed, interacted intensely with the Bactria-Margiana archaeological complex. This interaction was formative, shaping the Indo-Iranians, who then split into the Indo-Aryans and Iranians sometime between 2000 and 1600 BCE. The Indo-Aryans embarked on their journey to the Levant and South Asia, while the Iranians moved into what is now Iran. This migration into northern India was likely not a massive invasion, but rather consisted of smaller, influential groups whose culture and language spread through acculturation and the absorption of other groups into their patron-client systems. Sound of a low, continuous drone with intermittent echoes of what sounds like distant horse hooves, barely perceptible. Central Asia, then, was the melting pot for the Indo-Iranians. These are the Indo-Aryan, Iranian, and Nuristani peoples, all speaking Indo-Iranian languages. The Proto-Indo-Iranians are widely identified with the Andronovo culture. Within this vast cultural complex, the older Sintashta culture, 2200 to 1900 BCE, is now recognized as its direct predecessor and the crucible where the Indo-Iranian language group likely manifested. The Sintashta culture is remarkable. Its settlements were built over or near earlier Poltavka settlements, showing a clear lineage, yet also influenced by the later Abashivo culture. The discovery of the earliest known chariots in Sintashta burials is a game-changer, a technology that revolutionized ancient warfare and spread across the Old World. These settlements were also centers of intense copper mining and bronze metallurgy, unusual for a steppe culture. The Andronovo culture, encompassing vast regions of western Siberia and the central Eurasian steppe, is a collection of related Bronze Age Indo-Iranian cultures. It's in this expansive cultural horizon that the Indo-Iranian languages solidified. The presence of the chariot, used by Indo-Aryans in the Mitanni Kingdom and Vedic India, and its earlier attestation at Sintashta, strongly corroborates the identification of Andronovo as Indo-Iranian. The interaction with the non-Indo-European Bactria-Margiana culture, BMAC, was equally crucial. This culture, centered in Afghanistan and Turkmenistan, profoundly influenced the Indo-Iranians. It's believed that Proto-Indo-Iranian arose partly due to this influence, with the Indo-Iranians borrowing distinctive religious beliefs and practices. Anthony suggests that the old Indic religion itself likely emerged in this contact zone, a syncretic mixture of old Central Asian and new Indo-European elements, including borrowing the names of gods like Indra and the ritual drink soma. The artifacts found in Murgar and Balochistan, characteristic of the BMAC, suggest a movement of people from Central Asia southwards, placing Indo-Aryan tribes in the BMAC area by at least 1700 BCE, coinciding with that culture's decline. From there, the Indo-Aryans continued their journey into the Indian subcontinent. It wasn't a single, monolithic movement, but rather multiple waves of migration into northern India, as suggested by scholars like Parpala. These waves could explain the diversity of views in the Rig Veda and the emergence of distinct Indo-Aryan cultural complexes in the later Vedic period, like the Kuru kingdom in the western Ganges plain and the greater Magadha culture in the eastern Ganges plain, which later gave rise to Jainism and Buddhism. For example, Parpala, in 2020, proposed an even earlier wave of Proto-Indo-Iranian speakers from the Sintashta culture into India around 1900 BCE, associated with the Copper Horde culture. This was followed by a pre-Rig Vedic Indo-Aryan wave, linked to the early Gandhara grave culture and the Atharva Veda tradition. The Rig Vedic wave, associated with the Fedorovo culture, came several centuries later, perhaps in the 14th century BCE. Sound of gentle waves lapping, mixed with the quiet murmur of a distant crowd, like history itself breathing. The Gandhara grave culture, emerging around 1600 BCE in what is now Pakistan and Afghanistan, is considered a primary candidate for the earliest bearers of Rigvedic culture. This culture brought new ceramics, new burial rites, both flexed inhumation and cremation, practices mentioned in early Vedic literature, and, crucially, the horse. Horse trappings and even horse burials underscore the animal's immense importance to the Gandharan grave culture, a custom shared with Andronovo, though with distinct burial styles. This picture reveals a layered movement. The first wave of Indo-Aryan migration likely included those who founded the Mitanni kingdom in northern Syria around 1600 to 1350 BCE, and the Vedic people who moved over the Hindu Kush into northern India. Christopher I. Beckwith even suggests that the Wusan, an Indo-European people of Inner Asia, were of Indo-Aryan origin, pushing the geographic spread even further east. The second wave is generally understood as the Iranian migration. Let's quickly touch upon the Mitanni kingdom. In northern Syria, the earliest written evidence for an Indo-Aryan language appears not in India, but in Hittite records concerning the Mitanni. The Mitanni kings bore Old Indic throne names, and Old Indic technical terms were used for horsemanship and charioteering. The very concept of artha, cosmic order and truth, central to the Rig Veda, was also employed there. Even Old Indic gods, including Indra, were known in Mitanni. Scholars largely agree that these Mitanni Indo-Aryans migrated from the north, not from India or vice versa, with the presence of Bactrimarjana loanwords further solidifying this theory. In northern India, during the early Vedic period, c. 1500 to 800 BCE, Indo-Aryan culture was concentrated in the northern Punjab, the land of the seven rivers, or Sapta Sindhu. In the later Vedic period, c. 800 to 500 BCE, this culture expanded into the western Ganges plain, centered around the Kuru and Panchala areas. This region became the heartland of Vedic culture, but the central Ganges plain, where later Magadha would rise, developed a distinct cultural identity, influenced but differentiated from the Kuru-Panchala region, giving rise to movements like Jainism and Buddhism. Sound of a subtle, gentle rainfall, a cleansing and renewing sound, with a deep, resonant tone beneath it. It's vital to clarify the relationship between the Indo-Aryan migrations and the Indus Valley Civilization, IVC. The Indo-Aryan migration into the northern Punjab began shortly after the decline of the IVC. The outdated Aryan invasion theory, which claimed a barbaric and violent Aryan conquest caused the IVC's downfall, is largely discredited. Archaeological and genetic data simply do not support it. The IVC began its decline around 1900 BCE, before the main Indo-Aryan migrations. This decline was primarily driven by aridification caused by shifting monsoons. Many Indus Valley cities were abandoned, and populations shifted eastward, with new settlements appearing in Gujarat and East Punjab. This localization process represents the only archaeologically documented west-to-east movement of human populations in the Indian subcontinent before the first millennium BCE. Crucially, there is significant evidence for cultural continuity in the post-Harappan period. Cranial and dental comparisons suggest ancient Harappans weren't drastically different from modern populations in northwestern India. No evidence of demographic disruptions or biological evidence for major new populations immediately after the Harappan decline has been found. The cemetery age culture, for instance, shows clear biological affinities with the earlier Harappan population. This wasn't a cultural discontinuity, but a shift in settlement patterns, urban decay due to climate change, not invading aliens. Recent excavations even show an overlap between Harappan and painted gray-ware pottery, indicating continuity. So, while the decline of the IVC wasn't caused by Aryan migrations, the spread of Indo-Aryan languages and culture in the region did coincide with this period of ecological catastrophe and societal reorganization. Scholars now argue that the historical Vedic culture resulted from an amalgamation of the immigrating Indo-Aryans with the remnants of the indigenous post-Harappan civilization, such as the ochre-colored pottery culture. It was a complex, multi-layered interaction, not a simple replacement. Sound of a deep, sustained chord, slowly fading, leaving a sense of lingering mystery. Our journey through the unveiling of ancient India reveals a story of adaptation, interaction, and profound change. The Indo-Aryan migrations were not a singular event, but a series of movements influenced by environmental pressures, technological innovations like the chariot, and the flexible social structures of the migrating groups. They encountered and interacted with pre-existing cultures, leading to a rich synthesis that laid the foundation for much of India's linguistic and cultural heritage. As we conclude this segment, take a moment to absorb the sheer scale of these transformations. From the subtle shifts in ancient soundscapes to the monumental movements of people across continents, history truly whispers in many voices. Next, we will delve deeper into the genetic footprints, unraveling the human tapestry further, seeing what the very building blocks of life tell us about these ancient journeys. Until then, keep vibing with history. The wind sounds return, slightly more prominent, joined by a distant, melancholic flute melody, slowly fading into silence. Welcome back, my friends, to Vibing History. Settle in, perhaps with a warm drink, as we continue our journey deep into the ancient past. We've traced the whispers of an ancient tongue, followed epic migrations across vast steppes, and glimpsed the changing landscapes of ancient India. Now we arrive at a fascinating crossroads, where the silent stories held within our very DNA begin to speak, offering a profound, sometimes surprising, understanding of these momentous shifts. Today, we are going to unravel the human tapestry itself, exploring the genetic footprints left by the Indo-Aryan migrations. It's a story of mingling ancestries, shifting languages, and the subtle, yet powerful, ways that cultural change leaves an indelible mark on our biological heritage. This isn't just about ancient bones and dusty artifacts. It's about the very essence of who we are, woven into the fabric of our genetic code. For centuries, scholars pondered the remarkable similarities between languages spoken across a vast swathe of the world, from the far reaches of Europe to the Indian subcontinent. How could Greek, Latin, Persian, and Sanskrit, seemingly disparate tongues, share such fundamental connections? The idea of a common ancestor, a proto-language, began to take hold in the 17th century, first proposed by the Dutch scholar Marcus Sirius van Boxhorn. He called it Scythian, an early attempt to explain this linguistic family tree. Fast forward to the 18th century, and figures like Jesuit missionary Gaston Laurent-Curdieu and, most famously, William Jones, an East India Company employee with a remarkable knack for languages, refined this theory. Jones, in 1786, upon studying Sanskrit, declared its wonderful structure, noting its profound affinity to Greek and Latin. He surmised that they must have sprung from some common source, which, perhaps, no longer exists. This was the genesis of the Proto-Indo-European theory, a linguistic argument that, as we now understand, finds robust support from a multitude of other scientific disciplines. Indeed, the Indo-Aryan migration theory, as we understand it today, is no longer solely a linguistic construct. It's a grand framework built upon the converging evidence of archaeology, anthropology, genetics, literary analysis, and even ecological studies. Each field offers a unique lens, revealing different facets of the same overarching story. Consider the linguistic evidence again. The connections between these ancient tongues aren't random. They follow predictable patterns of sound shifts, grammar, and vocabulary. This meticulous work of historical comparative linguistics allows us to reconstruct fragments of that long-lost Proto-Indo-European language. What's crucial here is that various characteristics within the Indo-European family strongly argue against an Indian origin for these languages. Instead, they consistently point to a steppe origin, a vast expanse of grasslands in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Then there's the archaeological story. This is where we visualize the Urhimat, the homeland on the Pontic Steppes. This region, around 5,200 BCE, witnessed a profound shift from foraging to pastoralism, driven by the introduction of cattle. Imagine communities transitioning, developing hierarchical social structures with chieftains, patron-client systems, and the exchange of goods. The Samara culture, in the late 6th and early 5th millennia BCE, near the Volga River, is considered a very early nucleus of this development. Later, the Kurgan culture emerged, a term coined by Maria Gimbutas in the 1950s, encompassing several cultures, including the Samara and, most prominently, the Yamnaya culture, 36th to 23rd centuries BC. The Yamnaya, with its pit grave culture, is widely considered the true nucleus of the Proto-Indo-European language. From this expansive region, the Indo-European languages began their remarkable spread, west, south, and east, starting around 4000 BCE. How did this spread occur? Not necessarily through vast armies, but likely carried by small groups of males, perhaps charismatic leaders, who, through those patron-client systems, gradually absorbed other groups into their cultural sphere. Think of it as a cultural and linguistic osmosis, rather than an overwhelming wave. Moving eastward from the Yamnaya, we find the Sintashta culture, 2200 to 1900 BC, a crucial point where common Indo-Iranian was spoken. It's here that we find the earliest known chariots, a revolutionary technology that would forever change warfare and transportation. From Sintashta emerged the Andronovo culture, 2000 to 1450 BC, which then interacted extensively with the Bactrian culture, 2250 to 1700 BC. This interaction was pivotal, shaping the Indo-Iranians and leading to their eventual split between 2000 and 1600 BCE into the Indo-Aryans and the Iranians. The Indo-Aryans then embarked on their journey, migrating southwards, first engaging with the Bactrian culture, from which they borrowed significant religious beliefs and practices, although notably with little genetic mingling. From there, they moved towards northern Syria and, in what were likely multiple waves, into the Punjab region of northern Pakistan and India. The Iranians, closely related, followed a similar trajectory, reaching western Iran before 1300 BCE. Both groups carried with them the seeds of the Indo-Iranian languages, forever altering the linguistic landscape of these regions. Now, let's turn our attention to the anthropological perspective, which helps us understand how these language shifts occurred. It's a tale not of mass migration, but often of elite recruitment and acculturation. Small groups, possessing an attractive social system, superior weaponry, or luxury goods that signified power, could exert significant influence over larger cultural areas. As David Anthony's revised steppe hypothesis suggests, the spread of Indo-European languages likely occurred not through simple folk migrations, but through the introduction of these languages by ritual and political elites. Local communities, seeing the advantages of aligning with these newcomers, would emulate them, adopting their language and cultural norms. Imagine the scenario: an Indo-Aryan chief, arriving with his chariots and a powerful new ideology, offers protection or new opportunities to existing agricultural communities. The local leaders might find it advantageous to join this new system, solidifying their own positions. This could involve bilingualism at first, eventually leading to a complete language shift. Crucially, as Michael Witzel notes, the term Arya didn't refer to a specific race, but to all those who had joined the tribes speaking Vedic Sanskrit and adhering to their cultural norms. This highlights a period of long acculturation, where existing populations and new arrivals interacted, shared languages, and eventually merged into a new cultural identity. This brings us to one of the most compelling pieces of the puzzle: genetics. The human genome, a vast library of our ancestral history, offers a window into these ancient movements. Modern studies, comparing ancient DNA samples with present-day South Asian populations, reveal a significant infusion of male steppe ancestry in the 2nd millennium BCE. What's particularly intriguing is that this steppe ancestry is disproportionately high today in many Brahmin and Bhumihar groups, elite populations that traditionally used Indo-European languages and were the keepers of the Vedic texts. This strong genetic correlation directly supports the elite dominance hypothesis, suggesting that incoming male elites from the steppe influenced the gene pool in a specific, observable way. Researchers have identified two primary ancestral components in India: ancestral North Indians, ANI, and ancestral South Indians, SI. The ANI genes show kinship with Middle Eastern, Central Asian, and European populations, while the ASI genes are more distinct, though related to the indigenous Andamanese. These two groups, after diverging some 50,000 years ago, began to mix extensively between 4,200 and 1,900 years ago, a period that precisely aligns with the proposed timing of the Indo-Aryan migrations. After this period, a shift towards endogamy, marriage within one's own group, became prevalent, perhaps influenced by the social structures that would later solidify into the caste system. It's a complex picture, certainly. While there's strong evidence of an ancient, common maternal ancestry across India, indicating deep roots within the subcontinent, the male-mediated migration from the steppe are equally clear. Studies on specific Y-chromosomal haplogroups, like R1a, are particularly illuminating. R1a, which originated in the vicinity of present-day Iran, diversified around 5,800 years ago into two major branches: one that spread into Europe, Z282, and another that moved eastward into Asia, Z93. The striking expansions within R1a and 93 at around 4,500 to 4,000 years ago, predating the collapse of the Indus Valley Civilization, strongly point to Bronze Age migrations from Central Asia that carried Indo-European speakers into India. This isn't a single, monolithic event, but rather multiple waves of arrival, consistent with the archaeological findings of diverse cultural complexes. Now, let's consider the literary research, which provides invaluable insights into the beliefs and geographical consciousness of these ancient peoples. Perhaps one of the most startling pieces of evidence for the Indo-Aryan presence comes not from India itself, but from northern Syria. The Mitanni Kingdom, a Hurrian-speaking state flourishing from around 1600 to 1350 BCE, featured an Indo-Aryan ruling class. In treaties with the Hittites, the Mitanni kings invoked deities like Mitra, Varuna, Indra, and the Nisatyas, all prominent Vedic gods. Even the technical terms for horse riding and chariot driving in Mitanni texts contained Old Indic loanwords. This strongly suggests that a branch of Indo-Aryans migrated to the Levant, establishing themselves as an aristocracy before eventually being absorbed into the local Hurrian population. Closer to India, the parallels between the Rigveda, the earliest stratum of Vedic Sanskrit, and the Avesta, the central religious text of Zoroastrianism in ancient Iran, are striking. They share deities like Mitra, priestly terms like Hat and zaatar, and the use of ritual substances like soma and hauma. Though the meanings of some terms diverged, Indo-Aryan deva, god, became Iranian diva, demon. These deep linguistic and religious connections unequivocally point to a shared Proto-Indo-Iranian cultural and linguistic heritage before their separation. While the Rig Veda itself doesn't explicitly describe an external homeland or migration, later Vedic and Puranic texts certainly do. They reveal a shift in geographical focus from the Punjab to the Gangetic Plains, and further south and east, clearly indicating a later expansion of Vedic religion and culture within the subcontinent. Furthermore, a specific verse in the Bodhana Shraddha Sutra, though admittedly a much later text, offers a remarkably direct statement. Eu went eastwards. His people are the Kuru Panchala and the Kasivadeha. This is the Ayava migration. His other people stayed at home. His people are the Gandhari, Parsu, and Arada. This is the Amavisava group. This passage is a clear textual reference to movements within ancient India, consistent with the overall migration narrative. Finally, we have the compelling evidence from ecological studies. Climate change, a powerful driver of human history, played a significant role. Around 4200 to 4100 BCE, a period of colder winters in Europe coincided with the spread of archaic Proto-Indo-European speaking steppe herders into the Danube Valley. Later, between 3500 and 3000 BCE, the Yamnaya culture adapted to a drier, cooler steppe, necessitating a more mobile form of pastoralism, relying on wagons and horseback riding to move their herds. This spurred greater mobility and social reorganization. Then, in the 3rd millennium BCE, widespread aridification struck both the Eurasian steppes and the Indian subcontinent. Water shortages led to ecological changes, causing the collapse of sedentary urban cultures across South-Central Asia, Afghanistan, Iran, and India. This environmental upheaval, a time of great upheaval, triggered large-scale migrations. The Indus Valley Civilization, for example, experienced a significant decline around 1900 BCE, its great cities abandoned as monsoons weakened and the Ghaggar-Hakra river system, a lifeline for many settlements, dried up. This ecological crisis pushed populations eastward, leading to what archaeologists call localization, a fragmentation of the larger urban civilization into smaller, regional cultures. It's into this dynamic, environmentally stressed landscape that the Indo-Aryans migrated. It wasn't an invasion in the violent sense once dramatically portrayed by archaeologists like Mortimer Wheeler, a notion now widely discredited. There's no evidence of massacres or widespread warfare that would correspond to an Aryan invasion theory. Instead, it was a migration of nomadic pastoralists, probably in smaller groups, into a region undergoing significant environmental and social change. They merged with and influenced the post-urban cultures, bringing their language, their new technologies like the war chariot, and their distinctive cultural norms, subtly but profoundly reshaping the demographic, linguistic, and cultural landscape of the Indian subcontinent. The narrative of indigenous Aryanism, which claims an Indian origin for Indo-Iranian languages and their speakers, is simply not supported by the overwhelming consensus of mainstream scholarship across linguistics, archaeology, genetics, and ecology. The converging evidence from these diverse fields points unmistakably to a homeland in the Eurasian steppes and a subsequent, multifaceted migration. This journey through the genetic footprints, the ancient texts, and the environmental shifts paints a picture of constant movement, adaptation, and cultural exchange. It's a reminder that history is rarely a simple, singular event, but a complex tapestry woven from countless individual decisions, environmental pressures, and the deep, silent currents of our shared ancestry. So, as we bring this segment to a close, let the echoes of these ancient migrations linger in your mind. The whispers of a shared language family, the archaeological trails across the steppes, the mingling of DNA, the clues within sacred texts, and the profound impact of climate change, all combine to tell a story of immense human movement that shaped not just languages and cultures, but the very genetic makeup of billions today. Thank you for vibing with history. We'll delve deeper into the specific cultural impacts of these migrations in our next installment. Until then, keep those historical gears turning. And so, our journey through the intricate tapestry of the Indo-Aryan migrations draws to a close. We've traversed the vast steppes, deciphered ancient tongues, witnessed the ebb and flow of civilizations, and probed the very DNA of history. It's a narrative that continues to provoke thought and inspire further discovery. I hope this deep dive has brought you both knowledge and tranquility. If you've enjoyed tonight's exploration, please consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who might appreciate a dose of ancient wisdom, and subscribing for more profound journeys into the past. Tell me in the comments below, what aspects of this migration fascinated you most? And what forgotten corner of history should we explore next? Until then, keep vibing with history and keep seeking the stories that define us.